Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another video on the History Vibe podcast. And today I'm joined by Peter DiGangi. He is the author of the book titled Dying for the Faith. And I'll have the link to purchase the book in the description below and in the pinned comment. So Peter, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, no, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to, get in front of your audience. I kind of wrote this with a couple of audiences in mind, and yours is among them because they'll hopefully appreciate some of the nuanced things I tried to convey. It's a fictional book, so I'm not making claims that this is historically accurate, but can I just briefly, I just want to talk about the fact that watching your show and many others like it, Myth Vision and on, I don't want to name so many and forget somebody else, right? But have you noticed how often somebody asks a super chat question and the answer from the expert is, well, we'll never know. There are certain things we're never going to know, and I'd only be speculating, and they don't want to speculate.
Yeah.
I definitely decided, because I was one of those people asking those questions, and I'm like, somebody's got to speculate about this, because otherwise, how the heck did we end up where we are?
Right.
So that's the ultimate motivation behind my story, is how did these things happen so that this small apocalyptic cult in first century Judea ends up being the most influential religious institution of the last 2,000 years,
So what is this book about, and why did you write it?
So it started as 5 conversations about the Messiah, right? So it was basically, if Carrier, he was a heavily influential on my thinking about this, and he was one of my consultants. And basically, if Jesus did start as a mythological character, then how is it possible that we have Christianity being the most influential institution in the world? So I put together the first chapter. Initially, it was just going to be 5 chronological steps. The first was Paul's conversion. And in my story, it's, heavily motivated by the guilt of being complicit in Stephen's martyrdom. Right. So that's from Acts. I'm not sure. Do you think that actually happened? Because I know people think that Acts is really not history, but I decided to use that in my story as a historical event. And he's so guilt-ridden, and then he gets a hold of the ascension of Isaiah, and then he has his vision, and then he converts and becomes a member of the Way. And then the second chapter, originally, I resequenced everything to try to make it flow more compelling, in a more compelling fashion. But the second conversation was between Paul and Peter and James about whether or not to let the Gentiles in without first converting to Judaism. Then the third conversation was a character that I kind of made up named Mark, who's at Masada, and he's trying to escape with all the documents from this religion. He gets caught and interrogated by a centurion, and that's when they move the goalposts, and the idea transitions from a military Messiah that's going to overthrow the Roman overlords to, oh no, this is a salvation, a spiritual salvation in the afterlife. Okay. And then the fourth chapter was basically, I created 2 characters, Luke and Lucia. And Lucia represents the mythicist argument, and Luke represents the mainstream. So he writes the Gospel of Luke. They're sitting there in a studio with a copy of Mark and a copy of Matthew, and the Septuagint, and they have the Homer's Odyssey, and so they're drawing from all the other literature at the time, and they come up with, they have the debate that I would like to see Carrier and the mainstream have, and then the final chapter was Eusebius, and they created a character named Jerome, not the Jerome, but just a guy named Jerry. And he kind of confesses to his buddy that he had discovered this mistaken interpolation that mentions James, the brother of the Lord. And he said, somebody got away with that mistake. I'm going to make a not so unintentional mistake. But he then doctors the Testimonium Flavianum, right? And he adds that paragraph about Jesus that I don't know about everybody, but it seems, would you say that consensus agrees that that's a forgery?
No, they do not. They say it's a partial interpolation, but that bit of it was written by Josephus. That's still the consensus. Yeah.
So my story, it's not it's understood that Eusebius added that to provide some independent historical evidence. So I'm definitely taking the mythicist view, and then I put together a series of fictional events that could have happened. As Carrier says on the back cover of my book, could this have happened? Maybe. But some kind of conversations like this had to have happened over the course of the first 2 centuries in order for this to become, what it became, So I'm obviously taking some artistic liberties, but I kind of feel like, maybe we could go to the slideshow to answer that question.
Sure.
So yeah, if you want to hit the first arrow, or are you going to control it, or should I?
You do have control, so you can hit it.
Okay, so I only became aware of this quote like 2 months ago. So long after I had written the book, you're probably aware of Toni Morrison. She was a Nobel Prize winner. This pretty much is me. I wanted to read a book about this, and no one wrote it, so I figured maybe I should give it a try. And I think this is kind of cool. Oh, it's not breaking it down individually. This is a series of movies and books that were advertised as, this book will reveal a secret that will shake the foundations of Christianity. So you remember Da Vinci Code. Do you know what the secret was?
I think it was about Jesus being married.
Yeah, he and Mary Magdalene were husband and wife, and they had a daughter. Conclave, that's kind of an interesting story. Have you seen that movie?
I saw that in the theater last year.
Yeah, that was very well done, didn't you think?
Yeah, I thought so.
And did you think that secret at the end, that spoiler, I don't want to be a spoiler for people that haven't seen it, but did you think that would shake the foundations of Christianity?
Oh yeah, I think it could, especially with the way they view certain kinds of people. Yeah, they wouldn't like that.
Right, but I don't know that it will shake the foundations, but it was a great twist.
It would create a shock, is really what I meant to say.
Yes, absolutely. It certainly did. Like in the last 2 minutes of the movie, you're like, "Holy cow!" Right? So, I thought that was very well done.
It kind of reminded me. It's also, I don't know if anyone's pointed this out, but it occurred to me. I don't want to spoil the end too much, but it's like when the women are coming out of there, the way they were coming out of there reminded me of the women running out of the tomb in Mark.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it was a little similar. I'm like, that's. I wonder if they had the Mark ending in mind there, the way they did that scene.
Interesting. Yeah. So this is, I think we'll get to this later, that, what the author intends or the director intends and what the audience, interprets it to be, could be completely different things. But yeah, that's interesting. Again, before I uploaded this to you, like each one of these would pop up as I hit the arrow. The different book would pop up. So that's why you can't see the one in the middle is called, what the heck is the name of it? The Fighter? No. This movie actually came out the same day as Conclave.
Oh, wow.
And Jesus is a trainer for like an MMA fighter. And the funny thing about that is I was working with Dr. Walsh, as you know. She sent me a link to that trailer, and she's like, here I am giving you a hard time about your breaches of historical anachronisms, And this thing has Jesus, like, I think he mentors the guy because he's so angry. I haven't seen the movie, but I think he mentors the guy because he can't control his anger. And he's like a boxer, and they had that kind of stuff back then, but I can't see what the name of the movie is because the Godspell thing is covering it. Certainly, God's Spotlight. Do you remember that one?
No, I don't.
That was a movie. It won Best Picture like 10 years ago. It came out 2015 or 16. It won Best Picture of the Year, the Oscar. And it was about the Boston Globe reporters and the editor that broke the story about the pedophile priest scandal. So again, I don't know that it shook the foundation of Christianity, but it certainly had a huge impact on a lot of people that I know personally, sort of like that was the end of going to church for them, And for a lot of people, again, in my own life, that they had real difficulties with how the church treated women and treated like homosexuality and stuff, but they couldn't necessarily push back against their parents. But once that happened, they would say, fine, do you want your grandson being molested by a priest? And the parents had no answer to that. So it was kind of like an excuse for them to kind of leave the church that they were already very at odds with growing up, So then how about The Last Temptation of Christ? Have you ever seen that?
I think I might have, yeah.
Do you know the scandal that was going to shake the foundation there?
I will say this, though. It's been many, many years, and I might be confusing another movie that's a little similar to it. So I don't remember.
Because I remember seeing it in the theater. I remember the Pope and the Cardinal Law here in Boston. Like, if you go to see that movie, you're like committing a sin, And as usual, they just don't get it because what the last temptation that he faced throughout the whole movie, he wanted to just live a normal life. He knew he was chosen. He knew how he was going to die, and he didn't really want to do that, right? Mm-hmm. And while he's on the cross, the devil comes to him and shows him a vision of what his life would have been if he.
Yeah, I didn't see the movie. I for some reason I had Mel Gibson's Passion.
Oh yeah,
in mind. But when I was, that's totally true movie.
Easy to confuse them, But to me, he resisted the temptation. That was the point. So the sacrifice was even greater. But the church didn't get that, as they usually don't, right? So they were like, you were a sinner if you went to see the movie. I don't think that shook the foundation of Christianity, but it was a great movie. Jesus Christ Superstar, that was very influential to me. That came out when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I, listened to that through my whole. I can remember, and I write about this in my book, one of my characters has the same aha moment that I had as a college sophomore. I had heard it when I was a kid. I kind of lost track of it and rediscovered it as an adult. And I just sort of listened to it from a completely different perspective all of a sudden, like the Zealots and the Pharisees, and like understanding how much more political it was than I knew as a kid. And I don't want to give away this kind of a cool thing. I have to walk this fine line between giving away too much of the story, right?
Right.
and just kind of teasing people a little bit to hopefully buy the book. I'm sure you're familiar with Godspell. And then the life of Brian. I don't know that it shook the foundation of Christianity, but it certainly was not well received by the Catholic Church. Have you ever seen that one?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the life of Brian. Yeah, I can definitely see why they didn't like it. The kind of thing that was being said in there.
Right. And again,
Yeah.
Dr. Carrier and Dr. Walsh both said like that is a very realistic depiction of ancient Rome. More so than like Gladiator or something like that, So if those books and movies are going to shake the foundation of Christianity, I would think that certainly my story would shake the foundation of Christianity, because again, the premise of my book is that he wasn't a real person. He was a mythological character like Zeus and Apollo and Mars and Aphrodite and Venus and Osiris and yada, yada, yada. 2,000 gods in the Roman Empire or the Mediterranean era, at that time, the dawn of the Common Era. And so how does our guy become the most popular and influential religion in history? So here's something that I think, I would describe the debate among biblical scholarship. You correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of people on the historicist side will agree that he was a historical person, but heavily mythologized by the Gospels. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of what they think.
And so that's the chicken side of the argument. The egg would be that he was a mythological character placed in history, at least a generation later. And so that's the chicken or the egg argument. But here's an interesting way of looking at this stuff. So here's all of well, not all of them, but here's a bunch of historians that you would think would have, been aware of this messianic movement led by Jesus of Nazareth, and yet they're all pretty much silent on him. Perhaps, Tacitus makes reference to, what does he make reference to? To Christians, but not Jesus, right?
Well, Tacitus does actually mention a Christus who was crucified under Pilate in his annals. But there are some lately that have been challenging its authenticity.
Okay,
But yeah, he's generally held to have mentioned Christ. It's a little like the Testimonium, but for Tacitus, the Tacitus equivalent of it.
Gotcha. I see. Gotcha. And Pliny the Elder definitely mentions having dealt with Christians, just not with that. No one's doubting there was a Christian movement, but that doesn't mean Christ was a real person. That's not evidence that he was a real person.
Yeah, I think it was Pliny the Younger. I thought that Pliny the Younger.
You're right. I'm sorry. I said Pliny the Elder. You're right. It is Pliny the Younger. All right. So again, I think I mentioned to you offline that if I feel like once I understood sort of the context of what was going on in first century Judea and how they understood kind of the overlap between science and religion and cosmology, the whole idea of these things happening up in the third heaven makes more sense, right? So this is just a quick clip from Dr. Fredrickson's book, Ancient Christianities. Carrier covers the same stuff. But this is really what I find most interesting. So do you remember this gold dress versus blue dress? On the left, do you remember that thing that went like viral about 10 years ago? Like some people see a gold dress, other people see a blue dress.
It sounds a little familiar. I think
How about the one on the right? The picture on the right, what do you see?
I see someone wearing a black uh, some kind of black coat made out of some kind of fur.
Right? And is
Yeah.
she a young woman or an old woman?
I guess an old woman?
Okay, so
Maybe.
the old woman's nose is the young woman's cheek and chin.
Oh.
And the old woman's mouth is a necklace on the young woman's neck. She's turned past a profile. Okay, so this was drawn in like 1885. I forget the artist, but he calls it My Wife and My Mother-in-Law. So some people look at it and see this beautiful young woman, again, like turned five. Can you see like just the edge of her nose beyond her cheekbone?
Yeah, I think so. So there's actually two different people in the photo?
Exactly.
It just
Some people
looks like
see a
it's
very
merged.
young, beautiful woman, and other people see an old woman. And once you see one, it's kind of hard to see the other.
I see. Okay.
And the reason I'm showing this is because once you see whatever you see, once you come to this chicken or egg debate with a belief, you're going to interpret all of these generally accepted facts completely.
It's analogous to how we interpret evidence differently.
100%, exactly. Okay. So would you agree that, like, both sides of the debate agree that Jesus Christ was, the historical Jesus was born somewhere between 6 BC and 4 BC, or maybe even 4 AD, I guess?
Or even a little earlier, but yeah.
So that's because they had to recalculate the calendar 300 years later when Constantine converted, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone pretty much agrees that of the Paul's letters, only 7 of them are authentic and written somewhere between 37 AD and 54. Does that sound right?
Yeah, 1 and 2 Corinthians might actually be 8 letters instead of 2 if you accept Frank Hughes and the late Bob Jewett's argumentation that the argument that Dr. Hughes and Dr. Jewett are making, that the 2 letters were compressed. I'm convinced of that.
Okay. But the timeline is pretty much in that ballpark, right?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment.
And that's the earliest evidence we have of Jesus, correct?
Yeah, I mean, and it depends on who you ask. I mean, there are some that are convinced that there was a hypothetical passion narrative before Paul, or if you take potentially the Gospel of the Hebrews seriously, but that's another mess for another time.
Right.
But at least in terms of the New Testament, yeah, it's the earliest text of the New Testament is Paul's 7 letters. So yeah.
And then we have Flavius Josephus, who was the guy who wrote the Antiquities and the Jewish War. The Jewish temple is destroyed in 70 AD. Then the Siege of Masada. And then it's not until after that, most people, consensus would say that Mark's not written until after that.
Right. It depends on who you ask. There are some scholars trying to rescue a pre-70 dating of Mark. I've even had a couple on my show.
Yeah.
But there are other scholars, like Samuel Zinner, Bartosz Adamczewski, Marcus Vincent, and others that will date the Gospels to the 2nd century.
Way back into the 2nd century. Okay.
Personally, I'm convinced of the 2nd century dating of the Gospels, with Mark as a slight exception, as I think it was written in the 90s AD. Personally.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of think, again, from Carrier's book, he has that whole thing about comparing the Jesus ben Ananias and the Passion in Mark's, that they so closely resemble each other. It seems like, and one of my characters says it's obvious that Mark is borrowing from Jesus ben Ananias.
Yeah, I do think Mark knows Josephus. I think all 4 Gospels know Josephus, quite frankly.
So then that would have to be after 93 then, correct?
Oh, entirely. That's my point of putting Mark in the 90s.
Yeah, perfect.
And
That's
Matthew,
what I thought.
Luke, Acts, John, and the Mark with the longer ending on it are 2nd century texts.
Yeah. Okay. So that's in agreement with, that's how I looked at it. That's how my characters view it. And then, so if Mark is 70s, Matthew's 80s, Luke and Acts are 90s, in my story, Luke writes the Gospel of Luke in 112 AD with the help of this woman, Lucia. And again, they're having the historicist mythicist debate. And again, without trying to maintain some kind of a cliffhanger, are you familiar with the whole idea that it's a mystery cult and there are 4 levels that Clement of Alexandria wrote about?
Yes.
So in my story, Luke and Lucia are outside. They're only at the first level of faith. And then when he writes the gospel, they're so impressed with it, they think, oh, he must be in. He must be up beyond like gnosis and faith and love. He's on the verge of inheritance, So I hope I didn't give away the store there, but that was kind of a central part of that storyline. And then, I don't really get into Constantine in my story other than the fact that the character of Eusebius acknowledges that we're on top now. So now we can correct the story that was misrepresented earlier. And he's the one who interpolates or forges, or whatever word you want to use, the Testimonium Flaviana. So now again, we go back to what do you want to see? Do you want to see the blue dress or the gold dress? Do you want to see the young woman or the old woman? You're familiar with this, I'm sure.
Yes.
And so for me, because I kind of come at this from the mythicist perspective, it looks to me like Paul saying, hey, this all happened up in the celestial realm. And he refers to according to scripture. He doesn't say, yeah, Peter and James told me this is what happened. He says this all happened according to scripture. According to scripture, then he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brothers at once. So you could definitely read this and say, oh yeah, Paul's under the impression that this was a celestial event, and then he appeared to Peter and James the same way he appeared to me. Because no one doubts that Paul never met him in person, correct?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think anybody thinks Paul met Jesus while he was alive.
Because he says he didn't, right? And so it seems to me, and my characters that I get in the head of Paul and Peter and James, they have this big argument about the whole Torah observance part, and do we let the Gentiles in without circumcision? Are they still going to get to eat bacon and all the other stuff that is prohibited? They never acknowledge that they met this guy in person. The implication throughout is that they had the same visions and revelations that Paul had. And it was all going to be, they never use the language, he's returning someday. They say he's going to be coming at the, rapture. But he wasn't here to be here. He wasn't here first, so he can't return the first time he comes. When he next comes, it'll be the first time he's on the planet. So this isn't going to solve anything. It's just you interpret it this way, the other guy interprets it the other way, right? And so then what else do we got? Yeah, I find this to be interesting that, and again, my characters discuss this, that it sounds like the whole morality is based on, don't worry, the end is coming. It's so close. Don't get caught retaliating this close to the end. Right? So if you were reading Paul, he's basically saying, don't turn the other cheek, or turn the other cheek, don't retaliate, but God's going to seek his vengeance for you. right? Leave room for the vengeance. He will heap burning coals upon your enemy's head. And then somewhere between 40 and 140 years later, when Matthew writes it, then it's an eye for, used to be an eye for an eye. I'm telling you to turn the other cheek. So that's the kind of disconnect between what Paul's saying and what the Gospels are saying. And in my opinion, it's because the end came. The temple was destroyed. The end of the world happened, and the Messiah didn't show up. Oh, no. We never meant a military Messiah. This is all a spiritual salvation in the next life. So I don't know if that sort of makes a compelling argument, but again, I'm not trying to convince anybody that of the mythicist argument so much as if you assume the mythicist argument has some merit, then how would this little cult have become the most powerful religion in the world? And I think a lot of these events must have happened whether he was a real historical person or a mythological person. Like something must have happened for this to blow up into the religion that we all know today. So it's kind of independent of whether he's mythicist or historicist. So the rest of the stuff I don't think we need to go through as far as the presentation. If you want to turn off the sharing the screen and just have whatever questions you want, I'm happy to do that.
So basically, the characters in different time periods. So the book covers different time periods, but the characters are trying to debate and figure out the truth about Christianity, Christian origins, and Jesus. Is that what's going on here? Is that a fair characterization, or is it a bit more than that?
No, I wouldn't say that. Other than those two characters, Luke and Lucia, they're not so much having the debate as he's been contracted by a Christian presbyter and a Christian bishop to write the real story, right? The Gospel of Luke. Because they were not happy with Mark's and Matthew's gospel. So we want to set the story straight. And they're having this discussion because Lucia is like a modern woman stuck in 2nd century Rome. Okay. It's funny. I've gotten some great feedback about my depiction of her character, but it's definitely not historical. Like Robin gave me a hard time about the liberties I took with Lucia, because if you were a woman in Rome, you were probably illiterate and you were property pretty much, right? And my character is the smartest one in the room. And I kind of wrote in that she was a widow of an older guy. She was forced into a marriage when she was 15 years old to a much older guy who died. And so now she's a widow. She's 23 years old, but she never was able to produce children for this guy. So she's kind of like a worthless old widow at 23, And so she kind of doesn't give it, she doesn't care what they do to her. She's so miserable about her state that she doesn't mind. It's kind of a love story between Luke and Lucia. But she represents the mythicist view. So she's looking at those other two gospels and saying, hey, you're missing the point. This is fiction. And Luke's like, no, he's a believer. So he wants to tell the story that Luke tells. But I have some very interesting twists in there where I have her compare the story of Jesus being the Son of God through Mary to some of the other gods having children with mortal women, right? And it was kind of an interesting twist in terms of the difference between the way Luke portrays it versus Matthew. And I kind of have that as a result of a conversation that Luke and Lucia have, and he wants to kind of appease her feminist side, So again, I feel like some of the more nuanced audience is going to appreciate some of those things, or or I should say the more sophisticated audience members will appreciate some of those more nuanced aspects of the story. But it's not explicitly like, hey, I think this is ridiculous. I think he was a myth. I mean, it's more implied, and it's not as explicit. And then I bring it into the modern era too, with kind of the dangers of believing in the story just because the guy at the front of the room has that authority. And that's where the pedophile priest scandal plays a part, you know. So, I mean, there's no questioning where I stand on it as the author. I think any reader is going to understand what I believe. But I try to be fairly fair and balanced, you know, to the historicist argument. And certainly that's what Luke represents.
And the last thing I do want to ask you about is what do you want people to take away from the book? What is the goal? Like, what do you want people to take away from this?
I guess that it's two things. The first is that, you know, there is so much we just don't know and probably never will know. And so much is subject to the interpretation of evidence that both sides agree on. I think in my first meeting with Carrier, I said, am I reading this correctly? It seems like, you know, 1 and 1 is 2, of course. 2 and 1 is 3. Who would argue with that? 3 and 1 is 4. But if you think 4 and 1 is 5, you're crazy, right? So that's where all of those pieces of evidence, both sides agree, but then you get to the interpretation. And, you know, think of the Crusades, think of the wars that have been fought, think of how polarized we are now politically in this country. I think we just have to be a little more tolerant and kinder to people's perspective. If you see that blue dress, not the gold dress, or if you see that young woman, not the old woman, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with the other perspective. It's just they see it differently, and we need to be more accepting of the different interpretations. I guess that's one of the things that I would hope people would take away. And then, you know, perhaps read the book, not my book, the Bible. You know, like I think growing up the way I did in Roman Catholic upbringing, we were not at all encouraged to actually read the Bible. It was sort of like, we'll tell you everything you need to know. And so when I read Carrier's book, I was very shocked to, you know, I'd read a passage in his book where he quotes one of Paul's letters. And I'm like, that can't be true. And then I'd go to the Bible and read Paul's letters like, holy cow, I can't believe I was misled so much as I was growing up, you know? So I definitely grew up a believer and then converted. Whereas you said you were not always that way, right?
I was never a believer.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you get so interested in this?
Well, what happened is in 2013, I was having some conversations with people, a couple people in person, and most of it was online. But this notion that I'm going to go to hell unless I convert. I will go to hell just as much as the person that leaves the faith. And my father's side has a Jewish background in terms of family. Even my parents are not believers, but mother's side is Catholic. So I said I'm going to look into these claims. I'm going to look into Judaism, Christianity. I was also interested in looking into Gnosticism in my when I was making my considerations, but primarily I was looking at Christianity, especially with the fear of hell in mind. Mm-hmm. And I decided that I was going to reject all religion. I would not convert to Christianity or any other religion for that matter. And what happened is I got to the 5th book of Moses, what is alleged to be the 5th book of Moses, the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 32. It says that Yahweh had inherited Israel from another god. I didn't know anything about scholarship at the time in 2013, but I realized what was going on there. And then later I find out as I continue to look. in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It says it's not according to the number of the children of Israel that the world was divided, and that Yahweh inherited Israel during that process. It was according to the number of the gods, of the sons of God. And then in the Septuagint, it's according to the number of the angels of God. So, but yeah, that's the main reason I rejected. I came to reject hell. Then the second reason is the fact that nowhere in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, does it ever state that there's a hell anywhere. So there's Sheol, which just means death, but there's no hell. So how does God not tell the Jewish people that there is hell? Why does he wait until Christians get around?
Yeah, right.
The faithless will go to hell in the book of Revelation. Why do we have to wait that long?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Or why? And Jesus talks about the lake of fire in the Gospel of Matthew. So why do we have to wait so long to get anything like this?
Mm-hmm.
Why? That's my issue. And so that's the second reason I rejected. But the primary reason was because, well, God has a father. I said to myself, God has a father.
And now, how old were you at this point?
I was, I think it was 14 going on 15.
Oh, so you were, wow, interesting. You were a bright kid, clearly, and skeptical and curious, obviously, right?
Yeah, I was skeptical and curious. You can say that.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So I kind of look at it almost like Lord of the Rings now. Like imagine a religion based on Lord of the Rings, and people saying 100 years from now or 2,000 years from now, someone finds a copy of the book Lord of the Rings, and then someone finds Peter Jackson's movies, and they're like, oh, I can't believe Peter Jackson did to Jesus what like Paul did to, like Peter Jackson did to Tolkien what Paul did to Jesus, right? Like they changed the theology, and this guy, there's a resurrection with Gandalf, right? There's a lot of parallels you can draw, and yet no one, like I find the Jesus story, like I've been watching The Chosen. Have you seen this series that's been created?
I've heard about it. I've heard about it a lot.
Yeah, I found it so compelling because what they do in that story, and it started as crowdfunded, right? It was originally crowdfunded the first season, and it got like 300 or 400 million views.
Wow.
So then a studio said, all right, we'll pick it up from here. And now they're on the 5th season. But the first season, I want to say, was 8 episodes long. And I'm going to guess that in the first 4 hours, the first 4 episodes, about an hour long each, I would say Jesus was in there for like 4 or 5 minutes, 10 minutes tops. It was all Peter, Simon, Mary Magdalene, Matthew, the tax collector. There's a Nicodemus, a Pharisee. So it's all these ancillary characters that they build these backstories on. And, no one can say that didn't happen, because if these characters in the Gospels had to have been real people, and so who knows what Peter's life was like before he met Jesus, and Matthew, the tax collector. It's very well done. In fact, I said to one of my editors, they stole my idea 4 years before I had it, because, I'm writing my book around all these ancillary characters because my book assumes that he wasn't a real person. So I can't be talking about him, I create a lot of characters that Paul and, Peter and James interact with. Right. So I have the real historical character interacting with characters that I've created. And I started writing the book before I knew about this Chosen thing. So it's not like I took any ideas from them. I just found it interesting that they had a similar approach. And it's clearly very, very popular because, like I said, it started as crowdfunded. Now they're on their 5th season, and they started showing them in the theater. So it was a streaming series, but the last 2 seasons, they take like 2 or 3 episodes and put it in the movies. And then a week later, they'd release another, episodes 4, 5, and 6 as an hour and a half long movie or 2.5 hour long movie, whatever. They're into the Holy Week now, like the Last Supper. But as far as I know, I think they're trying to really extend it. And who knows, they'll go 10 seasons with Acts of the Apostles, right? But I would highly recommend it because it's very well done, and it really gives you an insight into that context that I was talking about earlier of what it was really like, the futility of fighting against the Roman Empire. And like, we can't have a military Messiah. We'll all get killed. Oh, well, what if it's a spiritual one in the afterlife? Like, you can see how that idea would appeal to people who were, predicting the end of the world, right? They were so miserable, and we're the chosen people. So how do we deal with this cognitive dissonance of we're chosen, and yet we keep getting conquered by the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans, and on and on and on. So that was compelling to me, and I got that from Carrier's book. So did I answer your question there? Is that
you did?
Yeah.
And I'd like to remind everybody real quick that Peter DiGangi's book is called Dying for Faith. And I'll have the link to purchase the book in the description below and also in the pinned comment just below that. And with that being said, thank you very much for joining me today, Peter.
No, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I hope your readers will enjoy it. And thanks again. Thanks to all who purchase it.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.